you see, knowing you as I do, I believe, and especially after hearing what you said, that you've always had it. You just needed a certain spark, let's say, an awakening moment. And so it sounds as though that awakening moment came when you picked up Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. Is that about right?
That's 100% correct. I would agree with that. And I would also add, I needed a vehicle. Right? I needed the how-to. I needed what are the steps, because we all know Think and Grow Rich is great. Outwitting the Devil is great. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is great. But without the hard steps, without the here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, it is very hard to achieve what I've done, what a lot of my mentors have done, what a lot of my friends now have done. Yes, you have to have a spark, you have to have an inspiration, but you also need the technical stuff.
Now, before getting into real estate investing, did you try any other paths which possibly developed certain skill stacking sets that led to real estate, or was it real estate, you think, all along?
So before I was an official real estate investor, I did sales. And that was one of the most important skill sets that I could have started with.
I agree.
Yeah, I started when I was 18 in sales. Prior to that, I was in high school, so I had odd jobs where I could control my schedule, like refereeing soccer games. My brother and I would, sell stuff in school. But my first professional sort of job or career was in sales. And to go into real estate investing after that, to go into one of the most wealthy industries that there is, the skill set of sales was so beneficial for me. I was able to have conversations that other people just weren't able to have because they lack that skill set. We were talking about this before we started. You can be the most smart person in the room. You can be the smartest individual, most intelligent. But without the ability to effectively communicate, it's very hard to get where you're trying to go.
Bridging what you just said, why real estate? What motivated you to go into real estate investing, and more specifically, seller finance?
Sure. So first things first, real estate I found through research. I love doing research. I love learning. The first thing is that very wealthy people hang out in real estate. And so I knew after reading something like Think and Grow Rich, I wanted to be very wealthy. My parents are middle class, so I was like, how can I get to the next level? What I noticed was very wealthy people hang out in real estate, and not just because they're in real estate. There are people who come from all different types of industries who end up in real estate. And so I had to crack that code. Why is real estate the answer? I found out quickly that it's because of depreciation. It's like a crazy good asset class. It always goes up. It appreciates. It has cash flow. It has tax benefits. There's like this trifecta, or even probably more, 5 or 6 benefits to owning real estate. And so I noticed that every single wealthy person, every single individual that I studied, somehow was involved in real estate. I said, okay, this is the industry that I need to get involved in. This is the industry that I need to learn about. And ultimately that led me to choosing it. I wouldn't say that it was like a passion. I've learned to love it. And because I know a lot about it now, I love it and I enjoy it. But it was recognizing the pattern and recognizing, okay, there aren't billionaires. Sure, there may be some billionaires, but billionaires don't hang out in the cleaning space. They don't hang out in the junk removal space.
Do you focus on any particular type of real estate?
Yeah, so I do loans, I do financing. And so within real estate, I said, okay, where do the richest people hang out within the richest industry? And a lot of times that was on the money side, that was on the financing side. So I very quickly tried to learn, okay, how do loans work? How does financing of real estate work? I caught on to seller finance, like you mentioned, sub 2. The financing behind the acquisition of real estate was something that really intrigued me.
Most everyone has been told that real estate is is one of the possibly the best ways to acquire wealth, especially equity. But they don't really discuss the how. Right. They don't discuss the how. Even Robert Kiyosaki's book, he talks about using debt, but he doesn't go into much detail about that. And that, in my opinion, is one of the big stumbling blocks for your average American, as they say, okay, we recognize that we can become successful in real estate, but we have no money. Mm-hmm. So then I suppose the next stage of the Morgan journey was to connect this motivation, this love for real estate as a vehicle, to finding a formula where anyone
100%
would be able to would be able to purchase real estate, acquire real estate. So how did you become acquainted with seller finance?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to invest in yourself and acquire the knowledge. It's very hard to do anything without knowing how to do it. So whether it be, a book that you buy, a course that you buy, a class that you take at your local college, you have to start to understand how do real estate transactions take place. When you mention seller finance, very specifically, I mean, there are dozens and dozens of great books on how do seller finance transactions take place. I was fortunate to find someone like Pace Morby, who teaches it on the internet. I actually got acquainted through a lot of the stuff that I do today through YouTube. But even before Pace, there were books, and I met someone yesterday who's been doing seller finance for 40 years. So it's about acquiring the knowledge, and anyone who wants to get into real estate, the number one person who can help you, and a lot of times they'll help you with very little cost, is a local title company or closing attorney. They will invest in their local community because you're going to bring them back business when you get whatever you have going. Meetups, there's lots of free meetups, but you're never going to do anything without understanding how it works, and you're probably never going to understand how it works without investing in yourself, whether it be you're spending money to go and get a course and education, you're spending time to go to a free meetup, you're spending energy to go and meet people who know more than you. But I would say those are the building blocks of the knowledge that I acquired around seller finance, real estate transactions. It was a combination of those investments, time, energy, and money.
I've heard a number of gurus, success and business gurus and motivational speakers talk about the necessity of taking action. And I agree with them.
Yeah.
And in fact, I even remember hearing Steve Harvey. He gave a very emotional talk about you got to jump, right? And I do agree. But I think what they're also missing, and when they speak to the public, is due diligence. Very important, because we all learn through our mistakes. I think you agree with that.
Yep.
But there are certain types of mistakes that are very hard to come back from. And I think that there's a parallel for almost every human behavior in the animal kingdom. An animal can learn through mistakes, but certain type of mistakes you can only make once in front of a lion, right? Do you find that seller finance mitigates some of those mistakes?
Well, I would say it depends. Seller finance is a very interesting way to finance real estate. I would say that it's a transaction that is dependent upon your relationship with the seller who's financing you. For example, if a seller finances you and you foreclose on that debt, they have to foreclose on that debt. You're in default. You've ruined a relationship. You might have a foreclosure on your record, but that doesn't mean that you can't go out and get another house seller finance, right? Deal with a different seller. So it's an interesting way to finance real estate in a way, where one mess up doesn't define you. If you happen to a foreclosure with a bank, they're going to make sure everyone knows about that in the future. So it's an interesting way to finance real estate, where it's if you can talk and you can negotiate and you understand how to present what you're doing, it can be very powerful. In the wrong hands, it can be very unfortunate for someone to have a lot of seller finance debt.
And what you just said, you touched upon at least 3 points that I think are very, very important, and I'll speak to one of them at least before I forget the other two. At age 58, sometimes I forget where I park my car.
No worries.
Right? So, but you mentioned relationships.
Yeah.
And relationships can spider web into many different types of relationships. There is the relationship that one has with their team. There is the relationship that one has with a seller, especially in a sensitive relationship where you're dealing with a foreclosure, full of emotion. Full of emotion. There's the relationship of the lender, where if you burn a bridge, they might not come back to you again, right? How have you managed to so successfully manage those kinds of relationships? We can speak of the team. Actually, let's preface that. Do you work alone, or do you work with a team, or do you have a dream team with you?
I have one partner, and the method that's worked for us thus far is to be very successful together and third party anything that we need to third party. Very rarely do we want to hire people in-house, because we find, this is probably something that we have to work through, and as we scale, we'll 100% need to bring people on, but we found that we can get a lot more done, just the two of us, than bringing someone on who might sit on their phone half the day or do 2 hours worth of work and call it a day and paying them salary for it. So at some point we'll have to scale and bring someone on. But right now I have one partner and we third party anything else that we have to do.
And also, speaking of relationships, when we're dealing with sellers, have you found any certain specific challenges there where, yes, we are dealing with money, but we are dealing with numbers.
Right.
We're dealing with undeniable numbers, but we're also dealing with an individual, a human being, who's going through a very difficult time, and it makes all the sense in the world for them to sell to you rather than to foreclose, but you have to use a little bit of empathy, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of human feeling there.
Yeah, I think when it comes to relationships, the thing that's been the most beneficial for me is just doing what you say you're going to do. That is like the foundation of strong relationships. Having a good reputation is doing what you say you're going to do. Then you can skill stack, right? You add good communication to that. You add empathy to that. You can add a lot of skills to that. But the foundation of who I am and who I think a lot of strong entrepreneurs are, showing up when you say you're going to show up, sending the email that you said you're going to send. People really appreciate that. And you can be a complete asshole, for lack of better words. And if you do what you say you're going to do, people still respect you.
So what I gather from that is that even though the business world oftentimes is a very rough place, it's a jungle, business is ultimately rests upon transparency and integrity.
Yep, 100%.
Right.
Businesses that have those core values do the best. Mm-hmm. They're consistent. They give you what you ask for. They deliver. They deliver in a time period that they said they were going to deliver. And those are some of the common traits that I see with the most successful people, whether they're nice or not. I'm fortunate. I learned, how to be kind, and I learned how to empathize. But whether you have that skill or not, it can be learned. Whether you have that or not, the one thing that you can do is do what you say you're going to do. Be consistent in that. Be persistent in that.
As well as to speak the truth, even when they're unpleasant, or perhaps especially when they're unpleasant truths.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%.
How do you size up properties? In other words, everyone says that real estate is a great thing, but you know what? There has to be some kind of criteria ultimately in saying whether this property is worth buying or not, whether it's feasible or not.
Right.
And I suppose the same would go to the feasibility of the financial side of it,
right.
of the loans, of the seller financing, whether this makes sense.
Yep.
Do you have a specific process?
Yeah, I think if you want to know mine, I'm more than happy to share. But for anyone listening, you have to kind of identify what kind of investor you want to be. There's lots of houses out there, and there's lots of asset classes. There's multifamily, there's storage, there's land, there's single family. You have to define what kind of investor do you want to be, and that largely is dependent on how much time do you want to invest, what resources do you have access to, how much money do you have. For example, if you have a lot of money and not a lot of time, it might be a better opportunity for you to go and buy turnkey properties and rent them out. If you have a lot of time and not a lot of money, it might be better for you to find those deals that have more equity. You're getting a house for pennies on the dollar because you can go and invest some sweat equity and make it a great property again. When I look at property myself, I'm looking for that opportunity on the ladder. The second one, I'm looking for arbitrage opportunities. I'm getting something for a deal. I'm going to add value. I'm going to force appreciation, and then I'm going to exit and make a win flow of cash. But there's a lot of different types of investor avatars, and everyone has a different criteria that they're going after. What's consistent across the board is an opportunity for arbitrage. And what I mean by that, if you buy a house for $100,000, you put $50K in it, can you now sell it for $250K? Let's say you buy a turnkey property, you put $30,000 down, you have a remaining mortgage for $270,000, your monthly payment is $1,500. Great, you can go and rent it for $2,200. There's always some spread. That is the basis of any good deal. There has to be some spread for profit. There has to be some profit margin, which is a term that anyone in business is familiar with. When
you come across a good deal, but the seller is unwilling to engage in seller financing, do you walk away from that deal?
So you don't ever want to be needy. That is one of the core beliefs I have as a deal maker. Neediness drives people away. So Momentarily, yes, you walk away, but a good follow-up system is always going to have that deal in your pipeline. Depending on the motivation of a seller, motivation changes in an instant. That's the interesting thing about our business. You could talk to someone on Wednesday, they say, look, I'm not interested, get off my porch, and come back on Friday, their mom has passed, something happened, they crashed their car, they need cash, and they're willing to sell that extra property that doesn't make them a lot of money. So motivation can change in an instant. You never want to be needy, but you do always want to follow up because motivation changes instantaneously. It's super important to be the first one and continuous to market. When I started in sales, I was working for a guy who was in real estate, and I was calling his leads, following up with sellers that were in his system. And on average, it took 13 touches before a deal got signed. 13 calls, maybe 13 messages, but it was 13 touches to that one seller before a deal got signed. Occasionally, you call someone one time, you get a deal done. You call them a second time, you get a deal done. But more often than not, the game of buying real estate acquisitions, especially off market, is a follow-up game.
I'm glad you touched upon that because that actually, we were at a Robert Frost moment. If you're not familiar with Robert Frost,
of course. Fast, one less traveled.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so one of them deals with the willingness to make cold calls. In this case, it sounds like they weren't completely cold calls, as well as door knocking, and we'll get to that in a second, as well as keeping the ideas of due diligence in the background. And we'll get to the sales aspect of it, the door knocking, the phone calls. But how do you do your due diligence? Do you have a checklist of things that you go down?
I mean, it's underwriting, right? How you have to know, do the numbers pencil out on this deal? Mm-hmm. If this house is going to cost me $100,000 and I'm going to put $50,000 worth of repairs into it, and after that it's only worth $170,000. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Mm-hmm. And so when you say due diligence, I don't care if a house is to the studs. I care about the margins. I care about the numbers. And with that lens, with that filter on looking at deals, you can turn anything into a good deal. It's just
title
do
searches,
the numbers.
liens.
Yeah. I mean, yes, of course, you have to go to title. Okay, so in terms of due diligence, you want to make sure that the numbers are what they say they are. If someone says they owe $100,000 on a property, you have to go to the closing attorney, to the title company, a local title company, and say, hey, can you do a title search on this? And make sure they don't owe $150,000 when they tell you they owe $100,000. Excuse me. But yeah, a lot of due diligence happens at the title company. Anything inside the house, I mean, you can do an inspection report and make sure there's no mold. The floor is not falling through. But yes, most of the due diligence, it comes down to the numbers. And any due diligence that isn't the numbers is related to the numbers 100%.
Just today, I heard of a true story dealing with mobile home parks.
Okay.
Also real estate, different variety of real estate, with very high profit margins. And I was kind of a bit caught off guard, even though I wasn't involved in it at all.
Okay.
Evidently, what happened was that the buyer purchased Florida mobile home parks that on paper were doing very well. And then as soon as they purchased the mobile home park, that same year, the revenues went down 65%. Oh. Now, what happened was that the owner of the mobile home parks, for a year prior, steered revenues from another mobile home park into that one.
Wow.
To give the appearance that was doing much better, right? Wow. And I thought to myself, how could one have performed due diligence to catch this?
Yeah. Great question. So I was looking at a deal maybe about 3 weeks ago now. This is in Atlanta. I'm local to Atlanta. And it was a subject to transaction. I'm going to be taking over a house subject to the existing mortgage. And there was a tenant in place. The mortgage was like $650. The tenant was supposedly paying $1,700 a month. I'm like, great. This is a stellar deal.
Cash flow.
Stellar deal. But similar to what you said, it was so important for me to perform that due diligence. I needed to see the past 12 months of that one individual renting that one house making the payments, and they couldn't show me that. So there's no deal.
Right. There comes a point where, just like the Kenny Rogers song, if you remember Kenny Rogers, he's a little bit, he's more from my time than yours. You have to know when to hold him. You have to know when to when to let go.
100%. So if I were in that scenario, I mean, it's unfortunate to hear that that guy got bamboozled.
Got fleeced, yeah.
Yeah, but how I would avoid that, if anyone's looking at a deal, if you're taking over anything with a tenant in place, you need to see each individual history, payment history of each individual unit. That's something that's super important.
So you go to that level of that level of granularity.
Because look, I mean, if I take over the property, this particular place where I was buying the deal, it would have taken me a year to evict that tenant. Mm-hmm. And after I evicted that tenant, I would have to rehab the property. At that point, my underwriting is underground. I'm negative. I'm losing money on the deal. So to that level of due diligence, that is the standard. I don't think of it as, hey, I'm going above and beyond. That is the standard. I need to see the past 12 months of payments, or this is no deal for me.
Do you also ask for tax returns?
Not on the property, no. I mean, we could see if the taxes are current at the title company.
A moment ago, we were talking about prospecting. Which included calling and door knocking.
Yes.
And I understand. I feel your pain, although you're smiling. But I knocked on, I'll put it to you this way. While I was on active duty service, I had gained so much vacation time. I was around age 50, and I thought to myself, I had a conversation with my wife. I said, what am I going to do after I leave the military?
Right.
So I decided to take a year and a half off. I had enough time to do it, leave of absence. And I got involved in financial industry. It was primarily sales, and I knocked on over 2,000 doors.
Wow.
And it wasn't a strategy that worked. I got a few clients, but it wasn't very good.
Wow.
Now, after researching you a little bit, I see that not only are you much better at that than I ever was, but you've developed a methodology that you teach for door knocking. Can you tell me a little bit about it, even though it's a little late for me?
Yeah. So I think what was unique about the way that I door knocked houses, I smile because I learned so much through those experiences. Mm-hmm. I learned so much about myself, about interactions with people, how to get what I wanted out of the deal. But what was unique about my experience door knocking is that every time I knocked on a door, I wasn't encountering a different personality. I was typically dealing with the same avatar. I was door knocking people who were approaching auction, approaching foreclosure. So
you did a search.
Correct.
Before you knocked on doors.
Correct.
That's smart.
So it was very easy for me, especially, after noticing the pattern, noticing, okay, these are the types of people that I'm dealing with, to develop, okay, here's how the conversation should look. Here's how the structure should look. We should only spend 30 minutes on your backstory and your history, because if I spend 31 turns into 3 hours. So I developed very clear and easy to navigate communication styles with the specific avatar I was continuously encountering.
Did you develop your own script?
100%, yeah. And here's the thing. I mean, a script is great, but everyone has to put their own seasoning on it, right? And so I developed my script. People ask me for it all the time. And even now, if I door knocked, it would probably be a little bit different than exactly what's on paper. You have to adjust based on who you're talking to a little bit. But overall, people who are approaching foreclosure, they care about one thing. They care about their family's safety. They care about where they're going to live next. They think the world's ending. So it's like a very unique conversation, but it's the same one. It's repetitive. It happens over and over again. It's a typical avatar of someone who's going to foreclosure.
From what I saw of you online, foreclosure seemed to form a sizable percentage of your business. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%.
Can you take me through a foreclosure? I've never really experienced one. Thank God.
Sure thing.
But can you take me through one?
Yeah, that is a good thing to thank God about. But so when I would knock on the door, these folks were 30 days away from their house being foreclosed on. This means someone hasn't paid their mortgage. They haven't paid it for a long time, because typically the bank will work with you for a period of time. And so the house is about to go to auction. At auction, investors bid on the property, and about a week after auction, an investor swings by the house, says, hey, I own this now, I need you to get out. The owners typically move, or the new owner, the investor, evicts them. So they're concerned about where they're going to live. They're concerned about how they're going to pay their bills. And the worst part about foreclosures, I would say, is all of them want to stay in the property, but they can't afford to stay in the property. So for a long period of time, I would say up until the 30 days, maybe even 2 weeks, maybe even 2 days before their house goes to auction, they completely ignore the problem. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear about it. They want to pretend it doesn't exist. So that's when I show up with a smile on my face, telling them everything's going to be okay. I would typically approach them and say, has anyone gone over all the options to avoid foreclosure? I wouldn't say I'm here to buy the house, because that's not what they want to hear. In fact, one of the largest deals that I did with foreclosures, I knocked on the guy's door. He said, I'm not selling my house. I said, no worries. Has anyone helped you understand how to avoid foreclosure? He said, oh, let me hear what you have to say. And I ended up buying the house, right? But it's just about all how you frame it. And so a typical foreclosure after auction, again, someone's going to buy the property and the owner will be kicked out or evicted. When I step in, they're either extending their time so it doesn't go to auction, they're doing a loan modification so that they can stay in the home, or in the best scenario, they would sell it to me.
Now, your industry is one that is absolutely rife, full of laws, regulations, rules. How do you stay updated?
Yeah, so I studied the foreclosure timelines. In terms of the marketing, I know that in some states you're not allowed to contact foreclosures. Fortunately for me, Florida was not one of those states, nor is Georgia, where I'm at now. But it is important to understand the timeline and how foreclosure actually works in the state that you might be located in. Foreclosure is the process of a lender taking back a property, selling the property off to other investors or a new buyer. In some states, that is a judicial process. It has to go through the court system. In order to foreclose, a lender has to sue the borrower in court first. In those states, it typically takes longer. Florida is a judicial state, and so it's a 9-month or longer process. I only like to contact people when they first receive their notice of default, because they're like, oh my God, everything's going down, they will sell. Or I like to contact them 30 days away from when they're at auction. This middle period, it's very hard to connect with someone because they've passed the, oh my God, this is happening, and they've put their head in the sand. And before they're 30 days away, they still have their head in the sand. In Georgia, it's a 60-day process, so you're pretty much in the clear to contact them anytime. In non-judicial states, a lender can foreclose right away. Georgia is one of those states. That's why it's such a shorter timeline. You don't have to go to court to foreclose on a property. You go to the county clerk. You say, "Hey, I have an issue here. Put this auction up for sale," and it's pretty much like done. Let me know how much you're owed. So it's important to understand the timeline in whatever state you might be pursuing it in, because it could be relevant to your marketing. It is relevant to your marketing, 100%.
Now, Alexis, at least I've noticed, but I think anyone who meets you would notice right off the bat that not only you're a caring, empathetic person, but you're incredibly pragmatic, incredibly practical. If I had to describe you, I'd say you're a small car with a V12 engine.
Thank you.
Now, but I wouldn't want that knowledge to go to waste.
Right.
Do you have an online academy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you tell us a little bit about the online
course. So
academy?
I developed the Morgan method, which shows people like, hey, here's how you talk to foreclosures. Here's how you get across. Here's how you differentiate yourself from the next person marketing to them. Keep in mind, every person who's in foreclosure, the bank's calling, the credit unions are calling, the mortgage company's calling, other real estate investors are calling. So it's very important. They probably get 50 calls a day. I never called the foreclosure. Why? Because it's ineffective. If they're not picking up 50 calls, what makes you think they're going to pick up 51, right? So I developed a way to differentiate yourself, to market differently, to get across to that group of people. And I think it's great because foreclosures are the best deals. You get access to some of the best opportunities to buy real estate at a cheaper than market price. I also do a lot of freebies on YouTube. Anyone can find me on social media. I'm at Alexis J. Morgan with 2 N's on all platforms. So I'll go on YouTube Live every Wednesday at 3 p.m. and answer questions that people have. If they're struggling with something, they can come on there and connect with me personally, one-on-one.
All right. And that kind of leads me to my last question.
Sure.
If someone wants to contact you for business, for personal appearances, for mentoring, or really for anything good, What would be the best way for them to contact you? By phone, by email, going to the website?
Great question. By email, by far, is the best way to get in touch with me. It's Alexis J. Morgan, 2 N's, @gmail.com. I respond to every email, typically within 1 or 2 hours. So if anyone needs any help, you can always reach me there.
All right. Well, it's really been a pleasure sharing this time with you, learning about what you do, and I'm very grateful to have met you and to have made your acquaintance. Our special guest for tonight, Alexis Morgan, All Business No Bull. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and send us your comments. Thank you so very much.